So happy y'all came. This is a true story. When I first published a book, I told my publisher, they said, where should I send you? I said, send me to Boston. I lived in Boston for like 12 years. My baby was born there. I've taught at all these schools in the academic ghetto around Boston. Send me to Boston. It's going to be great. I got there. There were 3 people there, and I had slept with 2 of them. So you can't imagine how shocked that's always what I expect. When I walk in, I always expect those 2 poor guys, who both, of course, hated me, and then, somebody, a nice person, who just randomly. I just think when you come out to talk about writing, you've entered a conversation that's been going on for thousands of years, and since people are making marks on cave walls and writing down, trying to draw up pictures of the bison they want to eat and the people they want to copulate with and where they buried people they loved. And for me, all art starts really, and maybe ends really, in the reader or the audience with longing, with a kind of longing to connect. So I always look at you guys and I think you longed yourselves. You longed yourselves here. You, it's almost impolite to talk about longing unless it leads to boning, or eating a ho-ho or something like that. But, you can talk about longing for food or longing for sex, but you're not supposed to talk about that longing for that kind of deep connection that I think everybody here must get, or I certainly get from reading. And I also want to say that I have a very bad relationship with nature. That I don't like nature. I mean, I don't want to. I want to stop global warming, and I recycle, and I do what I'm supposed to do, but I don't feel anything about it. The only thing I really feel strongly about, and it's true, it's really true, and I think I live in New York City for this reason, is the human face. My mother was a portrait painter, and she was always looking at paintings, of people or photographs of people, and it is a true phenomenon that when I am having a really shitty day and I want to kill everybody on the subway, I start to pray for every little face I see, and it's amazing how people you would otherwise hate and be irritated by because they're breathing your air. You can develop this affection for. So you all look like, and especially if you've been in the memoir business for as long as I have, you all look like these individual repositories of stories and passions and tragedies and losses and dramas, and each one of you, all of us. I mean, it's impossible to be a human being and not suffer. I mean, that's what those wacky Buddhists always talk about, is suffering. And so even though you're all cleaned up and you look nice, I know your secrets. And also by coming here, you have self-selected as a weirdo. I mean, you're not normal people. I mean, this young woman came to this reading in Washington, D.C., and she had this great quote from Flannery O'Connor tattooed on her arm. It said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you odd." So you are all, with my wand, you're all odd. There you are. So I practice this also, this kind of weird spirituality called Ignatian spirituality. It's very Catholic and kind of medieval, but I was an atheist my whole life, so you can just think I've lost my mind in recent years. But it asks you to find God in all places and God in all things, even on the subway. The most challenging place to find God some days. So I just ask you, whether you have a spiritual bone in your body or not, to just pretend. What if, all the forces in the universe conspired to bring us all here together to be part of this conversation? And more and more often when I think about, it's one of my students. It's Keith Gesson. Hi. Look, he turned out okay. Hey. He was also a big, he spent most of his time at our university at Syracuse playing hockey, I think was his big thing. So I want you to think up some questions about memoir, too, because I want to have a kind of mini class after this, a kind of Q&A where we talk. Writing memoir, if it's done right, is knocking yourself out with your own fist. I have never met anybody who's done this and not, who's waded into the waters of memory and not really kind of drowned a little. I know none of you have ever been in a mental health professional's office, but if you have, you start remembering things. And when I first went into therapy, it was, I promise I'm not going to go on and on about my therapy, I'm not that person. But I would go into this room with this person and I would think, I don't have anything to talk about. And then like an hour later, or 15 minutes later, I'd be shoved down onto the street and I'd be sitting there with my face all wet thinking, what happened? I think we're all repositories of so much. And when I coach somebody through writing one, I always feel like that mean sergeant in Platoon, like if you didn't see Platoon, this guy's been shot and his guts are all extruding from his abdomen, and the guy with the big scary scar on his face leans over him and is going like, take the pain. And to some extent, I think if you're interested in writing a memoir, and one reason I wrote this book was that so many of the other books about writing memoir were so cheerful. They were cheerful, and then people would tell me about these writing prompts, and I'm somebody who, when I have a writing prompt, I just think, in my mind, it's like you put, a vacuum hose in my cortex and sucked out every word I ever knew. And because I have found it all to be complicated and difficult, and about these feelings coming up and these memories coming up. One reason I think and also nobody elected me the boss of memoir. I'm not. Lots of people do this differently. And what recommends me then to write about this is not that I've written 3 memoirs. It's not even that I've been teaching memoirs since 1985, which turns out now to be 30 years. I taught a memoir class 30 years ago at Tufts University. It's that I am like the biggest fan. Like, how the good thing about Patti Smith was she couldn't really sing, but she was just such a fan of like rock and roll and Bob Dylan and whatever, Mapplethorpe. She was just a fan, and I sort of feel like I bring that to memoir. When I was 10 years old, and I think this is actually written down, like you can actually find this piece of paper. It's in they did Amanda Fortini did a Paris Review interview with me, and in my 10-year-old journal, 1965, I wrote, when I grow up, I will write 1/2 poetry, and I wrote the fraction out, 1/2 poetry, and 1/2 autobiography. Like, where did I even get this? And then after that, I wrote like the most pathetic sentence anyone has ever written. I am not very successful as a little girl. I was an abject failure. I swore, I bit people. It was not good. When I grow up, I will probably be a mess, which is, of course, what the neighbor ladies would say about me is, Mary Karr, you're such a mess. But I remember I couldn't even remember what memoirs were in the house. My mother was sort of involved with Dr. King, and she marched in Selma, and a little involved with the civil rights movement. So there were, starting in 1945 with Black Boy, there were books by people of color. And if you're a white person living in the Jim Crow South, you don't know the experience of people of color. I mean, even as a little girl, you kind of do, but nobody talks about it. So I think in a way, maybe Richard Wright's Black Boy, maybe I had read that, because I know my mother had that book. There was a book called Black Like Me, about a white guy who changed his skin color and lived in the deep South. And, but I also remember Helen Keller and Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou, when I was in the 11th grade, that I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings came out. And I remember reading that book, and maybe all these books for me were the beginning of compassion. They were the beginning of, I didn't read about being blind and deaf and think, she didn't seem so other to me. The brilliance of her writing, as I remember it, because I haven't read that book probably since I was a kid, is that loneliness, that cut-offedness, and entering into language. When she finally was able to say the word water, they do it. They do it in the movie with what's her name? Say again?
Annie Sullivan.
Oh, that's right, Annie Sullivan. She spells out, and she has a word, and then it's just like this bridge. But also, I remember reading Angelou, and I mean, for me, literature, I obviously fancied I was going to be a writer. I mean, where I got this idea, we don't know. I had an 8th grade principal actually tell me once, I was scolded. I was like brought into his office and scolded, and he said, if you persist in this delusion that you're going to grow up and be a poet, you will wind up no more than a common prostitute. Who says this to like a 12-year-old girl? I mean, this guy should have been shot. He really, so I had these delusions that I was going to be a writer, but then if you looked in the New Yorker, which my mother got, and then we couldn't afford it so you could get it at the library, it was all these guys, it was like Salinger and Cheever and all these guys who went to Ivy League schools and used, summer as a verb, the guys with the deck shoes. And so when I read Angelou, it wasn't like, oh, this is what it's like to be a person of color. I thought, oh, you can write about us. Because to me, to even write about working people was so foreign. You never read about people who just had to go to like dumb jobs and work in the store and stuff like that. So for me, I think reading memoirs, there was something about a voice crying out of the wilderness of lived experience. It just sort of something about, being alive and then trying to make sense of it on the page that just made me feel less lonely. I was just a lonely kid. And even a novel, I mean, we all kind of feel like Holden Caulfield and Scout, or at some point we felt they were like our buddies or something. But I knew that they didn't exist. I could sort of enter the dream and live the dream while I was reading, but I didn't get the hope that I got from reading about someone else's life. So it seemed to me like if Maya Angelou and Helen Keller could get out of the messes they were in, maybe I could get out of where I was, which was in this house with these crazy people I shared DNA with. And just kind of reading an hour in kind of this state of socially sanctioned disassociation to try to just go down the rabbit hole of a book. I've written obviously widely about my family, and they have their own problems, mostly now being dead. Well, they are mostly. But they also lied to me, and I resent it now more than I did, I think, even when I wrote the Liars Club. I was lied to so often and with such conviction, starting with the phrase, "I'm not drunk." Always a lie. Anybody tells you not drunk, get your breathalyzer out, And the other thing they told me all the time, both these things I think sort of led me to memoir, was that everything was okay. And it was obvious everything wasn't okay. It was not okay. People have stitches in their heads, they're being taken capital A away in the, to the mental Marriott. And the people are armed and they're drinking vodka, and it's not a wholesome environment. And then if you would say to them, but you locked yourself in the bathroom yesterday and you had a gun to your head, and I frown on this. I mean, if you object to it, they look at you like you're the turd in the punch bowl, like, how dare you bring this up? Like it's something you're supposed to act like, everybody's supposed to act like this didn't happen. I think this kind of nutty, kind of 1950s anesthetized, sanitized vision of family, I think also as much as anything drove a kind of craze for memoir, because people wanted a window into other houses. I wanted to look in other houses and say, how did these people continue to eat Thanksgiving with each other, knowing what they do and behaving as that I know they've behaved? How did they continue to show up and buy birthday presents and not lunge across the breakfast table and strangle each? Well, that there is some of that. The other thing I think that drove the audience for it is that fiction has become more unrealistic, right? It's more and more dystopic, more and more fantastic. And I think people who hunger for reality have been turning to memoir, not because it's a better genre or anything like that, but just because fiction's not handling so much real stuff anymore. But I remember when I was a graduate student, I heard it likened to carving the Lord's Prayer on a grain of rice. It was just really the province of weirdos and film stars, and if you were prime minister of somewhere, you wrote a memoir, and other than that. And it does recommend itself. It is a democratic form. I mean, you could call it primitive. Probably the Academy, the American Academy would call it primitive because it's episodic. You're a junior in high school, then you're a senior, then you get you get a job or you drop out, and things progress mostly in a kind of linear fashion. Everybody wants to know what the big secret to this is, and supposedly I'm supposed to have the secret. I'm going to tell you right now what the secret is to writing a memoir. Is anybody in here interested in writing a memoir? Is there some of that here? Okay. Here's the secret. This is it. Voice. Voice. You develop a voice. A voice is like a big bandwidth cable that kind of lowers your experience into the head of the reader. Or it's more like the voice is like an avatar for you, for your memory and your experience. And by experience, I mean external experience, what I call carnal experience. People think that's going to mean that boning thing again, but sadly, no. It just means physical. The reason I use carnal instead of physical is because, well, from being Catholic, you start thinking about carne, in meat is just what a hunk of meat you are. It's true, and so this avatar, kind of the voice explains not just what the physical world is like that you occupy, but what your interior is. And that's the other reason that people don't get sued and why I haven't been tarred and feathered for writing about people by people I'm kin to, because I think no one reading a book with a really distinctive voice mistakes it for a work of journalism or a work of history. You never lose sight that it's this particular person talking. The Angelo book, the Caged Bird book, that first one, which I remember so well, she opens, describing this little girl as standing in front of a church, and she's terrified and shaking because she can't remember her Bible verse. But her mother, she had this dress that her mother had it was like some old white lady was like throwing it away, and her mother like cut it down, and she thought this dress, she just thought it was just made her look like a movie star. And then she got up there, and it's sort of like in the 8th grade when you think you look okay, right? And then suddenly people's eyes light on you and you realize, you didn't wash your hair last week. I mean, there's all this stuff you're supposed to be doing that you're not doing to maintain yourself physically. And so that sort of crippling self-consciousness she describes. So no one reading that thinks it's anybody's experience but hers. It's really like you're creating a self. So everybody says, well, how do you remember all this stuff? You've written all these books, and they imagine that I've done research, or they imagine that I have diaries. I have like 3 diaries, and they don't have anything they have like that sentence in them, which tells you how I feel, but not really anything that's going on it doesn't even tell you what memoirs are in my house. So what I think I have is you know how it is when you remember. You'll have like an image, and then you'll have a piece of language, and then you'll have a feeling about something. Or mostly we remember in these really convenient sound bites where we sort of shrink down. But most of the sound bites I have discovered, having written three memoirs, are wrong. Like, I remembered when I started writing Cherry, I remembered that I was really smart in high school. There's no evidence that I was smart. I made a D in art. I dropped out. One of the dumb things I did was, we helped my friend Dooney put together a bunch of blotter acid in these, where you tear up surf magazines and you put little squares of blotter acid in the surf magazines. We didn't realize that the LSD goes into your pores of your hands. So then we're in school, like both walking down the hall, like going like this. I hitchhiked. I did just innumerable dumb things. And every now and then I would like read Anna Karenina. Like I would do like one smart thing. But mostly it's like dumb, 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 dumb. Smart, it's like, so. But what I realized was that my best friend in high school was one of the smartest people I ever met. And the boy I had a big crush on was also really smart. So I was a fan of smart people. But even the fact that I would have been deluded about that, about myself, is something I should tell the reader. It's that schism between who I remembered myself to be in my grown-up self, wishing I had been smart. And of course, I also went to this really crummy school. I swear to God, I overheard once in my in the locker room of my gym, where's this Europe place that everybody's talking about? So like, I did know where Europe was by the time I was in high school. So maybe the competition for smartosity in my hometown the bar was lower than it should have been. But a lot of writing memoir is sort of sifting through those sound bites and looking for evidence. Is this true or not? And the terrible thing is that it's often not true, that we remember things about ourselves and about our loved ones I always say you're kind of ambushed by the truth. You think you know what happened to you. And so, and also you're combing through this language and these images and these ideas you have about yourself. And what you're looking for is a real memory. And most of those we don't think about. It's sort of like, if somebody broke your heart because, Billy Carl Cash wouldn't dance with me when I asked him to dance at the Sadie Hawkins dance. And I came home and I cried, and my mother said, you'll laugh about this later. If I were the same person I was, in 7th grade, I wouldn't laugh about it. But I'm this whole other human, and I have credit cards, and, I have some agency in the world. So it's almost looking for those moments, and again, if you've done therapy or you've done something like this, or have any of you ever gone to a reunion, like a high school reunion or a college reunion? You're nodding, you're not old enough to have had to go to a reunion. And I see these middle-aged people, and I'm like, I went to school with really cute teenagers. And what had they send me these old guys? What happened? And then I remember this girl coming up to me and she said, "Oh, it's Jana White." I said, "Jana, I remember your name. I'm so sorry. I can't place you." And she said, "Oh, I sat behind you in Miss Pickett's English class." And it was literally, and it's like these, seeds, the hard seed of memory kind of splits open and these vines start I could see her 12-year-old face. Just perfectly, I could see I could have picked out foundation for her. And she had this beautiful kind of dark pre-Raphaelite hair, and she wore it in a thing, and she had braces, and nobody had braces because her dad was an orthodontist, and so had gone to college, which was a big thing. She played the flute, and and then I remembered the whole class. I remembered that there was a guy I had a crush on who sat behind me, at the very back row, and then the other cute guy sat across from him, and at one point they were passing around a picture, or passing something around, and I was saying, "What is it, what is it?" And everybody was like, no, you can't see it. And I snatched it out of his hand. It was me with antennae and googly eyes and whiskers and everything, and I was just and I was horrified. But all of these things sort of came back to me out of that one moment. And I also remembered that when I walked out of that class, I turned right and I went to Miss Barnes' speech class, and that was the last period. And then at last period, I walked across the football field to my house, and that boy I had a crush on was playing football. And I could see his little blue eyes inside the shadow of that helmet. And I would walk by and wait for him to, what? Propose marriage to me in the 7th grade? I don't know. I mean, the poor guy. I don't know what I thought was going to happen. But when I found that memory, I remembered what it felt like to write his name over and over and over on my notebook. And you almost hypnotize yourself. I mean, you go into this altered state. And I'm sure that boys, teenage boys are thinking about, boffing, Marilyn Monroe into guacamole or whatever y'all were thinking. But girls are thinking this really dopey shit. And I remember thinking, how can I write about this? It's so corny. It's so corny. It's not cool. And yet, as soon as I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to be that little girl. But it was there's something very true about it. So I think the other big secret is I always say, it's like you run a Geiger counter over how you feel, and you're looking for those moments where who you were and what you wanted, and your schemes and plans to get what you wanted, become real or alive to. I could remember thinking, I'm going to walk by him at football, and what? There was just a ... There was no and very good plan at the end of it. So you have these other kinds of memories, like the time, me and Stu Chavoy and Brian Leidy stole a bunch of watermelons from Mr. Beaumont's pasture, and he shot at us with rock salt, and Brian Leidy got hit in the butt with rock salt. Sounds like, that's like a scene in a shitty movie. But you're writing a memoir, you think, a lot has to happen. There has to be drama. The biggest drama in the world was walking across that football field, holding my books to my little flat chest. We're wondering if there would ever be any breasts there. As I walked by the guy that I was just so fixated and riveted on. So you're looking for those moments as you write that kind of bloom open and are true to you. Oh my God, I've gone on and on. I don't want to do this. I'd rather hear from you guys. So I'm going to shut up. Y'all ask questions. Thank you.